Hello, and welcome to the ECR Retail Loss Sell More and Lose Less podcast series. My name is Colin Peacock. I've worked in the retail and FMCG business for more than 40 years, working on the dark side of retail on retail loss at every point in the supply chain. And when we ask retailers just how much of your unknown loss problem this freight crime accounts for, we got numbers of sort of 6 to 10%, maybe an average of 8%, 8% of unknown loss being attributed to freight crime. Now, of course, we think that self-checkouts might be about 20 to 30%. So, but 8% is still going to be significant, and a significant number of euros and dollars. And again, it's perhaps not surprising when you consider how much, freight is in transit at any one time. We had one retailer recently share that they have $200 million worth of freight on the road every day. And so it's hard to believe that's not vulnerable to some sort of loss. Anyway, Professor Emmeline has done some research in this area, and so I'm looking forward to her maybe sharing some of that research and sharing some of the work that we've been picking up with retailers in some of our working group meetings and interviews. So, Emmeline, over to you.
Hi, Colin. It's great to be with you. And what an interesting working group we had this week on freight crime. And they talked about on the road, but also on the rails as well, which is often overlooked. And as you say, like the huge sums of value of cargo and items that are being moved around, the prize to solve this issue is huge. Now, last year I produced a report which was looking at tobacco theft specifically, and one of the key modus operandi or tactics that offenders were using was to target in-transit deliveries of tobacco. And if people aren't familiar with jump-up theft or rollovers, I would encourage you to have a look online at some of the video footage of that. It's like watching a James Bond movie of people targeting moving vehicles on the highways, drilling them open, taking the goods, often without the driver even being aware that the theft has occurred. Now, what's interesting is that these types of crime have largely been tackled. So beginning to understand some of the practical steps that businesses could take to deter that type of criminality and just make it so much harder for those criminals to steal high value goods. But as ever, with any crime type, you plug one issue and then opens up another vulnerability. And that's what the working group really focused on, these new and emerging threats and how to begin to tackle them. So we talked about the challenges of driver recruitment. And is this generating a new vulnerability? Because with agency drivers, we're seeing an infiltration of offenders now taking up these jobs, often with the intention to steal, or they realize there's an opportunity once they've got one of these contract driving roles, and then they begin to steal, as you say, a small amount often, which can make it really challenging for the business to actually identify when the product actually went missing. So there's lots of vulnerabilities there, I think, isn't there, Colin, around that delivery process?
Yeah, and I think in your research you pointed, and this was UK specific, but perhaps it's also a relevant point around the rest of the world about just the sanction. The sanctions here are relatively low if you're careful and not violent. Is that something you picked up on?
Definitely. So the more organised, the more professional offenders know not to use violence, not to use weapons, because that's what will elevate the crime type in the eyes of law enforcement. So they're very careful, very measured in the way that they commit this crime, and the way that it's recorded in England and Wales obfuscates the severity of the crime. So for example, it will be £70,000 worth of Lego or tobacco has been taken from a lorry, but it's recorded as theft from the vehicle. Now that would also include somebody snatching a mobile phone from an open car door. So it's almost hidden in terms of its severity. And I think that's where there's a real education piece for law enforcement to collaborate more with industry to understand the scale of these issues.
Yeah, and that could be the same in other countries, as you point out. I mean, I think what was really fascinating for me, just listening to retailers, is just how, some retailers have actually allocated, I would say, good resources against this, commensurate with, this being 8% of the shrink problem. Whereas others, are really just sort of like not allocating resources. And I wonder what your theories might be as to why do we have this sort of almost convergence in approach, whereas you'd think that the threat would be consistent across retailers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's been so much emphasis on bricks and mortar, on external theft, that this has almost been overlooked. So it's almost crept up in some ways that just the scale of the problem. And you're absolutely right. It was very difficult for people on the call to put a figure on this. But when they were sort of pushed to, really nail it down, the percentage they were attributing in terms of losses were huge. And then they talk about the level of resources that they had within the business or the level of attention that they could garner. And it was minimal in comparison. So there's a real sort of disproportionate, allocation of resource to tackle this. But we heard from one retailer who had begun to resolve, almost eliminate one type, that rollover, that jump up theft, and we're saving to the tune of tens of millions of pounds for the business. So there's a real ROI here to invest in those teams. But as you mentioned in the introduction, overwhelmingly, the language is around speed. It's not accuracy. So it's about how do we begin to educate that you need speed and accuracy, because otherwise the losses are really significant.
Yeah, we did hear that was one. Again, it might just be very ad hoc, but it was interesting that, one of the retailers shared that when they have almost black totes that are very secure and very obvious and would be noticed if they did not arrive, the thieves did not touch those, so it's interesting to see, well, what could we do with maybe AI technology or computer vision? I think we heard some pieces about that. What have you been hearing about sort of the use of these sort of, if you like, pallet recognition technologies? Is that something that people are looking at?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a whole range of, sort of ways that this can deter offenders. So one of those around pallet recognition, checking the accuracy. It doesn't have to be timely and laborious anymore. We have the technology to support businesses in this respect. But also really simple things like better locks as well. That's a really key thing. Or the way that pallets are packaged as well, so that the more expensive items are at the back of the lorry, or they're low down, or there's anti-tamper or tamper-proof detectors. There's all these different mechanisms that I think can begin to support businesses in the supply chain. One thing I thought was really interesting, though, is the almost arms race, and you see this again with any sort of acquisitive crime. But there was quite a lot of checks and balances that were being put in around GPS tracking, unscheduled stops that would begin to signify, that a crime might have taken place. And sometimes this might just be 20 seconds. That's all that's needed. But to pick up on that a driver was stopped or slowed down for too long, that was really interesting. But what some of the people on the call talked about was how the drivers have become aware of these processes. And so we're trying to manipulate it. So it just tells me that we need to always stay one step ahead and think about how those bad actors are beginning to play the game to still be able to commit their crimes.
Yeah, there's a wonderful piece in there, wasn't there, in one of the conversations around, GPS trackers. We were looking at the GPS tracker and suddenly, it moved in 20, in seemingly 20 seconds by about 5 miles. And, like, what was this? So yeah. There are some patterns to be picked up.
Exactly. And
yeah,
just thinking it's a glitch in the system, but actually maybe it's been deliberately tampered with. Now, we focus a lot, I think, already on, drivers being the culprits themselves, but also drivers can be incredibly vulnerable when they're out on the road. And, many of the people on the call talked about those, that there just isn't safe locations for them to be able to do their scheduled stops. And they're just sitting ducks sometimes. They don't have the support or the security perhaps that they need. And I think that's really a wake-up call for the industry as well, to better protect vulnerable drivers and give them locations that are safe for them to do their stops where, you know, they're not being targeted.
Well, to your point, you know, there are, you know, some retailers who say we just, as a policy, we will not allow our drivers to do any overnight stops. But that comes at the cost of efficiency and practical implications, you know, in terms of distances. But I think it also calls out the need for, you know, that loss prevention won't be able to tackle this on their own, and they do need to engage others to have a real cross-functional effort against this, and backed up by data analytics with GPS and trackers, so we really get to see what's going on here, and then perhaps, you know, thinking about for some of the very high value items, some more secure routes that can be tracked more easily.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we enter into the golden quarter now as well, you know, we're going to see a huge amount of pressure on efficiencies, on speed, you know, e-commerce really driving that people want goods, you know, delivered ever quicker to their doorsteps or, you know, into other locations. And I think this is going to put a huge amount of pressure on these distribution systems. So yeah, I think now's the time to really focus on how to shut down those vulnerabilities.
Well, as you say, you know, you said at the start about the sort of emerging crisis in terms of lack of drivers. Again, we're going to be more picky, we're going to be needing more contractors. And again, we know that that's another area where you need to be on your guard for fake contractors. I think we recently saw a documentary, you know, on television that featured just some of these fake contractors. Look, Emmeline, fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts on this problem of goods lost in transit, you know, freight crime. Really, really grateful. And we'll keep on tracking this problem, and see where there's some breakthroughs and updates and maybe greater resources being allocated by retailers going forward. So thank you very much.
Great to see you. Thanks, Colin.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to all the ECR Retail Loss community for the sharing of their knowledge, their research and latest learnings that ensure that we become truly a global platform for learning. My name is Colin Peacock. This is the Sell More and Lose Less podcast, and if you liked it, please subscribe so you automatically get all future episodes. And also, if you think your colleagues and friends might also like it, please ask them to follow ECR Retail Loss on LinkedIn and tune in to our next podcasts. If you didn't like it, then let us know and we'll try and fix it. Either way, see you next time. Thank you again.